right? You think God, the gaze goes up to heaven. You think about God somewhere in the skies looking down on us benevolently, perhaps like a monarch. Those were the old images. We have many depictions of God as a king. Or these days, of course, it's much easier to think about God as a CEO. Now, the reality is, if you look through our traditions, you find a lot of references to God as a worker. That begins in the very beginning of the Bible. If you read through the creation stories, there is one narrative where God plants a garden and God forms Adam out of clay. This is something that a worker would do. If God were a CEO, the story would read, God had his workers do this work. Tell somebody else, go plant a garden. Tell somebody else, go build Adam from clay. But here, God self is doing this work. If you think about some of the formative moments in our Jewish Christian traditions, you come to the Exodus. What is this all about? Well, in reality, of course, Moses is a great prophet, a great religious leader, but Moses is also a labor leader. This is a labor struggle. This is about God liberating slaves from Egypt. And if you read the story of the burning bush in Exodus 3, the interesting thing is that you have this record of God talking about the liberation of slaves. God saying, I have heard the cry of my people. And you wonder, only now? Why only now? Took it so long? What took him so long? Now, the reality is, God hears the cry. God starts doing something about it, calling Moses and Aaron and putting the people on the road. So this is all exciting stuff, but we're usually not talking about it because we think religion. We don't think real, active, everyday labor, but this is what this is about. Moses as a labor leader. If you take this forward to Jesus, of course, you all know that Jesus was born as the son, well, we usually think of the son of a carpenter. The reality is Jesus was born as the son of what we today would call a construction worker, most likely a day laborer. So this was not somebody who had a little business, perhaps a shop, or who had, was a contractor, but this was someone who did the work that needed to be done, most likely for the Roman Empire. They had large building projects, very much like large building projects today, where the workers were worked very hard around the clock, doing any kind of work. And after the projects were done, they were laid off. So you could be pretty sure that Jesus was not only a construction worker, Jesus also experienced unemployment. Sort of stuff that we usually only talk about behind closed doors, certainly in middle-class congregations. Now, the thing is, this sort of stuff affects millions and millions and millions of people around the world, in this country. It affects people that work in various places, and it does affect the middle class. I want us to keep that in mind. This is not just talking about others, this is really talking about the 99% and developing what I'm calling here deep solidarity. We're realizing that we're in this thing together. This is now no longer noblesse oblige, where we're trying to help some others who are less fortunate. But what we learned in Dallas, this is one of my own things. I'm involved in jobs with justice, religion, and labor struggles, most recently with the Walmart workers. What is happening to the Walmart workers around the country and around the world, really, is also happening to more and more of us. As goes Walmart, so goes the economy. And one day, if you look back at your job, you realize that cutting of benefits, the cutting of hours, the cutting of contracts and securities and so on started somewhere. So as we pay attention to what happens at the grassroots, we begin to realize this is something that involves all of us. So here, religion and labor are very closely related. And I submit to you as a theologian that looking at labor can help us understand religion more deeply. And looking at religion more deeply can help us understand labor more deeply, because the labor movements also need some help. They've become narrow, they sometimes become ossified. A labor organizer from the National AFL-CIO said to me recently, so you're working with two lost causes, the churches and the AFL-CIO unions. They're all losing members. Well, fortunately, that's not really true. The churches are not just losing members. Looking at all of you gives me hope. We're rebuilding the churches from the bottom up. And this is what's happening in the unions as well. There is some movement to rebuild labor also from the bottom up rather than from the top down. So this is the sort of things that we'll be talking about this afternoon. And let me just say a few more words from this theological perspective before we then hear from some of the organizers and the workers directly involved in some other theological reflections. We'll have some time at the end then to engage in some common conversation. And so as we go along, start thinking about questions that you would like to raise, and we'll go into that conversation part. Perhaps one more thing here. If we think about the labor movement, we usually think about a secular movement, but this is not our history. If you think about how labor and religion shaped up together in this country, you come to a time when it was almost common sense for churches to be together with the workers. About 100 years ago, the Methodists and then some other churches adopted a social creed, which was all about religion and labor. This was the mainline churches being out there in a way that they're not now. And what is so strange to me is that when we mention labor in mainline churches these days, unless it's very clear-cut moral failures, people get very nervous. People don't want to talk about it. So you wonder what's going on. That's not our history. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I've been there for 20 years in the struggle. Where's my amen corner? I need some cheers for that. This is hard work. But here's something that I didn't know, and nobody of living memory, I believe, knows in Dallas, Texas. And that is that about 100 years ago, pretty much exactly 100 years ago, in northeast Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, they had these type of camp meetings like the Wild Goose. They didn't call them that back then. But they brought together about 10,000 people at these camp meetings, which were organized by Christian socialists. In Texas and Oklahoma, mind you, right? Christian socialists, 10,000 of them coming together, camping out together, having these kinds of meetings. I often say to my students, if we can do it here, meaning Texas, Dallas, and so on, we can do it anywhere. So here we're in the North Carolina mountains. I think this is a great place to talk about these things. And you come from all over. And I'm really hoping that this is the beginning of something that will really bond us together. And maybe the Wild Goose will pick up some of that. They put us here in a very small tent, assuming that this labor issue is probably not going to attract as many people. Well, it's great to have you all here. But this is a beginning movement. This is picking up steam, and not only because it's the right thing to do, I think it goes, as I keep saying here, to the very heart of our religion itself. This is about who is God? Is God ultimately the heavenly CEO? Is God a working person? Who is Jesus Christ? Well, I talked about Jesus being a construction worker. There's something else for those of you interested in the historical Jesus. Most recently, we figured out that Jesus wasn't just a radical preacher. Jesus, that's not what made him dangerous ultimately in the Roman Empire. Jesus also was an organizer. And this is what really made him dangerous to the Romans. So here is something in the study of Jesus that we're just figuring out. It's not just about radical preaching, presentations. It is about organizing. And this is why we have this panel here talking about how we might organize, not just for the benefit of the workers, but for the benefit of our faith, for the benefit of all of humanity. Certainly the 99%. And the 1% are always invited. The 1% are not included because they too can make a decision, they can have a conversion, they can put themselves on the side of the 99%. If you followed Occupy, you probably know that there's a 99% website where people hold up little cards saying, I am the 99% and this is my story. There's also a website that says, we stand with the 99%. Those are 1%ers holding up little cards telling their story about why they would stand with the 1%. So thanks so much for coming. And I'll be passing the microphone on now to Claire Komisky and Nelly Rodriguez from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which is down in Florida.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Bueno, ya nos presentó acá el compañero. Yo soy Nelly Rodríguez y vengo de la coalición de trabajadores en Immokalee, Florida.
So Joerg already introduced us, but my name is Nelly Rodriguez, and I'm a member of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida. And my name is Claire Komisky. I work with Interfaith Action, an ally organization of the CIW, and I'll be interpreting for this portion.
Y bueno, para los que no saben, la coalición es una organización que está basada allá en Immokalee y está formada por trabajadores del campo, que somos pescadores de tomate. Todos los miembros que somos parte del staff venimos de pescar el tomate de los campos.
So for those of you who don't know, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is a farm worker organization in Florida, and all of us who are the staff there come from picking tomatoes in the fields.
Y nuestra organización empezó a formarse desde el año de 1993, pensando en acabar con los abusos que afectaban mucho a nuestros compañeros en la labor, a hombres y mujeres que eran pues víctimas de abusos, no trabajos, largas horas, no pagados, acoso con las mujeres, violencia en la labor. Y eso fue el motivo por el cual nosotros nos organizamos como trabajadores.
And our organization got started in 1993. A small group of workers got together to confront the conditions that we were facing in the fields, from physical abuse to sexual harassment to other types of violence in the fields that both men and women faced. And so we, as workers in the community, got together to begin to organize to see how we could change these conditions ourselves.
Y empezamos solos, empezamos sin apoyo. Básicamente solos empezamos a organizarnos hasta que con el tiempo después tuvimos el apoyo, como dijo el compañero, con mucha fe, pensando siempre en que Dios nos iba a ayudar a salir adelante. Y también con esa misma fe logramos el apoyo de diferentes iglesias.
And when we first began to organize, we were alone, but we had faith in God that we would be able to move ahead and move forward. And with that, we also joined in other people in their faith to join together and make our movement bigger.
Logramos el apoyo de iglesias y diferentes escuelas que estaban también involucradas e interesadas en apoyar para que acabaran con los abusos que enfrentábamos.
We were able to gain the support of different churches and student groups and others who joined with us to confront and put an end to these abuses.
Nuestra campaña, nuestra lucha empezó con los los rancheros que nos empleaban para piscar su tomate y que no se daban cuenta de los abusos cuales estamos enfrentando. Lo que queríamos nosotros era buscar un diálogo con esos rancheros para ver de qué modo ellos nos podían también ayudar y trabajar juntos para acabar con esos abusos.
Our struggle first began directed at the growers, who were the ones who were employing us, trying just to seek a dialogue to see how we could put an end to the conditions that we were facing.
Con el paso del tiempo, con el apoyo y con la fe que teníamos en que lo íbamos a lograr, tuvimos una visión diferente de que si íbamos a enfocar nuestra lucha, era enfocarla en las corporaciones, que son básicamente los que se aprovechan de las ganancias, y con ese poder que tienen, lo deberían de usar también para mejorar las condiciones y exigir a los rancheros que acabara con los abusos para los trabajadores.
But with the passage of time, and with our faith to continue forward to win this struggle, we realized that we had to take a different strategy, and that was going directly to the corporations that buy the products that we pick, because they take advantage of the work that we do and profit greatly off of it. So if they have that great power, they also have a responsibility to use that power to put an end to the abuses that we face.
Fue así cuando pues logramos que el primer comprador que vino a la mesa del diálogo a apoyar para los trabajadores fue Taco Bell.
And in this campaign, the first buyer that we were able to get to sign an agreement with us was Taco Bell.
Pero esto se dice fácil, que ya fue Taco Bell y que ya la campaña ya pasó. Fueron 10 años de estar nosotros luchando, haciendo campañas, haciendo giras desde Immokalee, Florida hasta California para hacer protestas en contra de Taco Bell. Y ahí fue donde también tuvo mucho que ver la iglesia, porque fue ahí que con esa fe y con esa esperanza de que nos iban a ayudar, ellos estaban ahí en diferentes denominaciones, diferentes iglesias.
But that, of course, wasn't a struggle that was won so easily. It was over 10 years of organizing up to that point that brought us to that victory. We left our town of Immokalee doing tours all across the country to Southern California and other places, and with that gained support from the church, many different denominations and different congregations who stood with us with that faith and hope that we would achieve this goal.
Eso fue lo que nosotros también nos dio el apoyo y nos dio esperanza de seguir adelante, de que había muchas iglesias, mucha gente que estaba apoyándonos. Y como le dije al principio, con nuestra fe, hoy en día ya hemos logrado que 11 corporaciones estén participando en el programa por comida justa. 11 corporaciones ya están apoyando y están respetando el código de conducta.
And it was with that faith and hope that we've continued forward together that we've been able to get to the point at which we're at today, where now 12 total corporations have signed on to these agreements and are respecting the code of conduct that we created.
Muchas iglesias que nos han abierto las puertas, muchas iglesias que han hecho oraciones, muchas iglesias que han compartido con nosotros bajo la lluvia, bajo el sol, diferentes marchas, protestas, ayunos, y ellos ahí están siempre con su fe y juntos hemos logrado que hoy en día como 33,000 trabajadores agrícolas están recibiendo los beneficios de la campaña por comida justa.
And in this campaign, what we've done together is churches have, opened their doors to us. They prayed with us, been out with us, marching, protesting under hot sun, under the, in the rain, during fasts and many other different actions. And that's why together, in this together, we've been able to achieve what we've achieved today. That now not only have these 12 corporations joined, but these agreements are affecting over 33,000 workers across the state of Florida.
Asimismo, hemos logrado que el 90% de las compañías que producen el tomate en la Florida sean parte del acuerdo también. Cuando en un principio nos echaba la policía cuando hacíamos protestas, hoy en día nosotros como trabajadores estamos yendo a los files a hablar con los demás trabajadores sobre cuáles son sus derechos y que deben de respetarlos como seres humanos.
And with this, 90% now of the Florida tomato industry has come on to these agreements. Whereas before, if we ever did a protest outside of their, on their land, we would be thrown out by the police. Now we're invited on to their property to talk with workers out in the fields about what their new rights are and how to ensure that they're treated with the respect and dignity that they should.
Entonces es algo que hemos logrado pues gracias al apoyo y con nuestra fe, como dijimos en un principio, porque para nosotros como trabajadores, levantarnos en la mañana, irnos a trabajar a las 4 de la mañana, lo único que hacemos es pedirle a Dios, Dios mío, cuídame y dame un nuevo día. Es lo que hacemos.
And, achieving what we've achieved, it's only been with hope and with faith, because as a worker, to wake up every morning and say, at 4 in the morning, to go out to work and say, God, please take care of me and let me have a new day.
También el hecho de que estamos hoy aquí en Norte Carolina es porque tenemos una campaña con Publix, que es un supermercado que es de la Florida. Es un supermercado que apoya mucho, él dice que apoya mucho a las familias, pero hasta la fecha tenemos 5 años de estar pidiendo también que sea parte de los acuerdos y que apoye con su poder para que las compañías que surten su tomate que también respeten los derechos del trabajador y acabar con los abusos que por muchos años pues habían afectado. Y Publix se ha negado hasta la fecha.
And part of the reason we're here in North Carolina is because we have a campaign continuing with Publix. Publix is a Florida-based company, but across the Southeast, and they have refused to join this agreement for almost 5 years now that we have been calling on them to be part of this agreement, and we want all the workers that pick the tomatoes that are sourced in public stores to enjoy these rights as well, and for them to put their power behind putting an end to the abuses, but up until now they've refused.
Tenemos esta campaña de hace 5 años y no ha sido nada de su parte, no ha puesto nada de su parte para decir pues qué es lo que quieren los trabajadores, pero sabemos que para acá lo que es Georgia y Norte Carolina está abriendo nuevos supermercados y por eso estamos aquí hablando con la gente sobre nuestra campaña.
And Publix has said it's a community or family focused company, but we know there's a lot more to be done, and Publix is expanding beyond Florida into Georgia. It's already across Georgia into the Carolinas, and Tennessee, and across the Southeast. So we want to bring that message here as well.
Pero pues sabemos que dice que para nosotros lo último que se pierde es la fe, y tarde que temprano con nuestra fe, Publix tiene que venir a la mesa del diálogo.
But we say the last thing that we'll ever lose is our faith, and we know that sooner or later Publix will come to the table to dialogue.
Entonces, pues gracias. Si tenemos más información también, si tienen preguntas, va a haber tiempo también para, si tienen alguna pregunta o alguna duda, nos pueden preguntar.
So thank you, and we have more information at our table down there, and we'll be happy to answer any questions later.
Well, first, I just want to say I live just a short drive from Immokalee, and one of the great joys of my life the last couple of years has been being part of a volunteer marching and speaking and working and organizing some demonstrations, and we've had some pray-ins at the Publix where we get clergy to come and pray in the produce section. Do we want to bring people in under the we could crowd in, come in as tight as you can, so we'll make room for everybody. Come right up here since it's starting to rain. You can come even closer. Let's just make sure there's room for everybody. Yeah, thanks. This is real close fellowship here. Can I just get forward? Perfect. We'll just keep going as y'all are moving in, and some of you have umbrellas. That's great. And this might only last a few minutes. Time will tell. But I just want to tell you, I'm so inspired by the work that Nelly and Claire and others are doing. It's beautiful to see. I want to tell a very short story, and then I'll pass this on. That maybe helps you see why this issue of labor is so important. I spent a couple weeks in Thailand last fall, and our time in Thailand was organized by some folks who we said we were having an international conference there, but we said we don't want to just come in and stay in a nice resort. So the first few days, our hosts gave us the chance, all of us who were visiting, to go out into the countryside and to live with some farm work families. And so the first day after we arrived, we all were assigned to join some of the Thai workers in the farms. Some went to pick chilies, some went to pick corn or maize. I was assigned to the rice planting crew. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of planting rice. Looks sort of very idyllic. It turns out that the rice fields are composted manure, including human excrement. So you're about up to your knee, just below your knee in excrement. There were a lot of jokes made about that. And then maybe 4 to 6 inches of water on top of that. And just to move your foot from one place to the next is exhausting. In our the Thai family I was working with was a 68-year-old woman, and she was moving through the mud, and I just thought, wow. And I worked for between 6 and 7 hours. At the end of the day, I was so sore, I was so exhausted. The 68-year-old woman works 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. The 38-year-old man who was working next to me and was sort of my teacher because I wasn't very good at it, none of us were very good at it at first, I said, how long have you been doing this? He said, I started working in the rice fields when I was 8 years old. And I said, do you get a day off a week? He said, no, I work 7 days a week since I was 8 years old for 30 years. I said, what happens if you're sick? He said, if I'm sick for one day, I do not eat for one day. So we spent the day working. It was I don't know what word to use for it. I worked as hard as I've ever worked physically. I made $1.40. And my 38-year-old friend beside me, he made about $2 because he was faster. So that night we were sitting with the family, and we heard the story of the family. The mother had a daughter who was 14, and the daughter was working in the field. She had been working since she was 8 or 9 years old. The word is, when you work out in the countryside, if you go to Bangkok or Pattaya and you're a 14-year-old girl, now understand, you make, let's say, $2 a day working in the rice field. A 14-year-old girl can make $1,400 a night as a sex worker. Now, $1,400 a night, your value goes down the older you are. But so when you're 30, you might make $1,000 a week, right? So your value sort of goes down in that industry. But now, when you're a 14-year-old girl and you know you could make as much money in one night at the beginning as your 3 adults would make in a year, when you go and do that, it's not because you like sex. You understand? It's because you love your family. And because your money keeps food on the table for your parents. And if you want your little sister to not go into the sex trade or work in the rice field, then you go to Pattaya or Bangkok so you can pay your sister's tuition. One of the members of our group, we went to Pattaya, which is the sort of international center of the sex trade, and different ones of us did different things, but a friend of mine went to one of the bars, which is a place where you pick up prostitutes, and he and his daughter, who was there, who speaks Thai, went to one of the tables, and one of the girls came up to, the way, it's sort of a whole thing, and he said, look, I don't want to have sex, but whatever you would make in the next couple of hours, I wonder if I could have 2 hours of your time just to sit here and talk, and I will pay you whatever you would make. He said, I just want to know your story. And so she was 30 some years old, and she said, she told him the story, basically what I've just told you. Hers involved she was married for a while, and her husband got a second and a third mistress, and she didn't want to put up with it, and he kicked her out, and so that's how she ended up in this work at a young age with some children and so on. But she said, I'm very happy because in one more year I will retire. Now, she'll retire and go back and work on a farm, but will go back knowing that she kept her parents alive, she kept her aunts and uncles alive, she kept all of her nieces and nephews so they could get an education. And when I heard that story, I want to tell you 2 things really struck me. First, I remembered the story of Jesus with the woman who came in and washed his feet, remember, at the home of Simon the Pharisee. Remember, he said, she is forgiven much because she loves much. And I remember thinking that night, maybe he was talking about she loves him much, that she washes feet. Maybe he was thinking, she's doing what she's doing because she's taking care of her aunts and uncles and so on. You see what I'm saying? I just gave me a new insight to what was going on. But the second thing I want to tell you is when we heard that story, I can't describe the visceral rage that I had. I wasn't upset. I mean, I'm upset about prostitution, obviously. But I'll tell you what I was really upset about. It sucks that people have to work 7 days a week and make $1.50 or $2 a day. And you have to be upset about the sex trade. You really have to be upset about the food industry that pays farm workers dirt wages. And you might say, yeah, people ought to pay more for rice, but everybody eats rice, so that means all the poor people would have to pay more. So it's not a simple solution. But what it means is there has to be organization of the kind that Joerg talked about, the kind that these folks are doing, in order to bring the kind of system-wide change that creates and preserves more justice for people. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Me da tanto gusto de ver gente de corazón acompañado en esta tarde tan maravillosa.
I'm so happy to see so many people with so much heart here with us this afternoon.
Mi nombre es Basilio Castro y vivo en Morganton, a 2 horas de aquí, en Norte Carolina.
My name is Basilio Castro and I live about 2 hours from here in Morganton.
Quiero contar un momentito, una pequeña historia. ¿Quién de ustedes le gusta comer pollo acá, pollo asado?
I want to share a little story with you. How many people here like to eat chicken, like roasted chicken?
Yo también.
Me too.
Comencé a trabajar en una planta, no sé si ustedes han escuchado, se llama Case Farm.
I want to share a little story. I started to work in a plant. I don't know if maybe some of you have heard of it. It's called Kay's Farm.
Está ubicado en Morganton.
It's located in Morganton.
El 95% de los trabajadores son hispanos.
And 95% of the workers there are Hispanic.
50% son mujeres.
50% are women.
Un día yo estaba trabajando en la línea donde pasan los pollos en los conos.
I was working there one day, and I was working on the line where the chickens come down.
Los pollos pasan 40 pollos por minutos.
And 40 chickens go by in 1 minute.
Todos los trabajadores trabajamos como máquinas, cortando los pollos de esta manera sin poder respirar.
And all of us workers work like machines, just cutting the chickens, like not even being able to breathe.
A la par mía estaba trabajando una señora tenía como 6 o 7 meses de embarazo.
At my side, there was a woman working. She was about 6-7 months pregnant.
La señora le pidió permiso al supervisor que fuera al baño y el supervisor dijo que no, porque nadie le podía ayudar.
And she asked permission from the supervisor to go to the bathroom, and he said no, because no one's going to be able to help.
Y la señora le preguntó 2 veces que si alguien le podía ayudar, pero el supervisor dijo que esperara, y le dije siempre espera y nunca le dio permiso.
And she wanted to go, be able to ask for help, and she kept asking, but he kept saying wait, and she couldn't go.
Y lamentablemente la señora se orinó en el pantalón.
And unfortunately, the woman in the end wet her pants.
Y el supervisor le gritó bien fuerte y lo llevó en la oficina.
And the supervisor just yelled at her and took her to the office.
Y la señora comenzó a llorar y llorar.
And this woman began crying and crying.
Yo sentí que ese dolor lo están haciendo a mi madre, a mi hermana, a mi vecino, o sentía que lo están haciendo a cada uno de ustedes que están acá.
And I felt this pain as if he was doing this to my mother, my sister, my neighbor, any of us who are here today.
Le dije a los compañeros, tenemos que apoyar a la señora. Nos fuimos como 10 personas a apoyarlo en la oficina y diciendo que no lo despida la señora.
And I said to my other coworkers, we have to support this woman. So 10 of us went over to the office to say they can't fire this woman.
Hay más de 400 personas se dieron cuenta de las injusticias, pero lamentablemente no dijeron nada porque tenían miedo de perder el trabajo.
And in that moment, more than 400 people realized that this injustice was going on, but no one said anything because everyone was afraid of losing their job.
Yo sé que no solo la compañía de Case Farm pasa esas injusticias, sino que pasa en diferentes compañías, diferentes en el campo, en muchas partes hay injusticia para los trabajadores.
And I know that this injustice doesn't just happen at Case Farms, but it happens in the fields and it happens in many other types of work.
Por esa razón me involucré a trabajar voluntariamente con el Centro de Trabajadores del Oeste de Carolina del Norte.
And that's why I got involved as a volunteer with the Worker Center of Western North Carolina.
Ahora estamos peleando sobre robo de salario. Tenemos también una campaña sobre darle educación, salud y seguridad en el trabajo para las personas que trabajan en las polleras.
And now we're working to fight wage theft, and we're also working to educate fellow workers about health and safety in the chicken plants.
Esos días escuchamos una mala noticia de parte del departamento de el USDA, del departamento de labor, que quieren aumentar la velocidad de la línea.
And in these days we heard some unfortunate news that from the USDA and the Department of Labor that they're trying to increase the speed of the chickens coming down the assembly or the line.
Yo digo, eso es injusto. ¿Cómo van a subir la velocidad de la línea si hoy en día muchas personas se enferman en el trabajo con el dolor en la mano? Muchas mujeres llegan a la casa sin poder abrazar a sus niños porque tienen dolor después de 8 horas de trabajo dentro del freezer, o la velocidad de la línea lo hace doler mucho las manos.
And I'm thinking, how can they say that they're going to increase the speed of this line when, as it stands, many people are suffering injustices being on this line, where there's women who arrive home after working 8-10 hours at work, not even being able to hug their children because of the pain that and the injury that they've experienced in their arms and hands.
El mes pasado tuvimos una reunión con el Departamento de Labor y de Agricultura en Washington. Llevé a 4 mujeres que trabajan en pollera.
Last month we had a meeting with the Department of Labor in Washington, and I went with 4 women who work in the chicken plant to Washington.
Y algo, lo que, no sé, yo veo que hay personas que no tienen corazón, porque el señor que trabaja en el Departamento de Agricultura dijo, yo pienso de que las personas se van a acostumbrar de la velocidad de la línea.
And I just think there's some people who don't even have a heart, because this guy there was working in the Department of Agriculture said, I think people are going to get used to the speed of the line.
Y la señora que lleva uno de los trabajadores se enojó demasiado la señora y se levantó. Yo pensé que lo iba a ahorcar al señor.
And one of the workers was so mad and got up, and I thought he was going to jump at this guy.
Y lo que ella hizo, puso la mano en la mesa, dice, ¿qué sentirías tú ver a la mano de tu madre que está hinchado como el mío? ¿Qué sentirías tú? Le hizo esa pregunta.
And what she said, and she got up and put her hand down on the table and said, what would you think if your mother's hand was as swollen as mine from the work that she does?
Y el señor se quedó callado.
And the man just was silent.
Es lo que estamos haciendo ahora, tratar la manera de que no pase ese acuerdo, esa ley, que no pase, que siga la velocidad de la línea, porque es una injusticia que pase en las plantas.
And so that's what we're working on now, is trying to not let that new law pass that would increase the speed of the line, because it's an injustice.
El compañero hablaba sobre la religión y de Dios. Yo sé que todos creemos en Dios. Respeto las religiones de cada uno de nosotros.
Our compañero here was talking about religion and God, and I think all of us here believe in God, and I respect all the religions present here.
Yo personalmente veo el rostro de Dios en el rostro de ustedes, en el rostro de las personas que trabajan en las polleras, en el campo, el rostro de un niño que trabaja en el field, que lo paga muy poco.
And I myself see the face of God in the face of all of you, in the face of anyone working in a chicken plant, in the face of anyone working in the fields, in the face of a child who's had to work out in the fields.
Y espero el ayuda de ustedes si un día vamos a hacer un boicot de no comprar pollo con Case Farm o Tyson. Espero la colaboración de ustedes.
And I hope for the support of you all. If we get to the point of launching a boycott against Case Farms or Tyson, I hope that we can count on you.
Me encanta un letrero que dice, lo utiliza siempre los de IWJ, dice, toda religión cree en justicia.
I love this sign that this organization, Interfaith Worker Justice, IWJ, has, that says, all religions believe in justice.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
So I'm going to stand up because my seat is a little lower. So I directed an organization called CLU, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice of California, statewide, for 11 years. And I want to talk to you just very briefly about the unique contribution that we can make as people of faith, particularly as Christians, in these kinds of conflicts. This is not just a physical crisis, an economic crisis. This is a spiritual crisis. Amen. It is a spiritual crisis, first and foremost, of disconnection. That in 1970, the average CEO in the United States earned 30 times more than his lowest paid worker. In the year 2000, it was 500 times more than his lowest paid worker. That's not necessary. In Switzerland, it was 15 times. In Japan, it was 10. It's a crisis of the body of Christ, right? Because the CEOs are Christians, the workers are Christians, the Walmart family, the Waltons are Christians. And what is a body? What's wrong with a body? When one part of the body doesn't feel the pain of the other part of the body, what do you call that disease, anyone? Leprosy. It isn't an accident that Jesus cured so many lepers. We have a body of Christ that is sick. So I want to just talk very briefly about what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of not only our ministry with our brothers and sisters, our workers, but our ministry to call to moral accountability those who are owners. And I want to say just something very quickly about the unique way that we can do that. But before we do that, I need to say one thing. At the beginning, Joerg said that we don't talk about labor. We talk about workers sometimes, but we don't talk about unions. That's a dirty word in churches. And unions are simply workers coming together, because one worker complaining about her hand can't get much of a reaction. All the workers together might be able to get a little more. There are problems with unions, and I would not pretend otherwise. But if you have a union in the hotel industry, you earn 30% more per hour for the same hotel chains as if you don't. So the workers coming together makes a difference. And I just want to underline that when I say that we have to call our people to moral accountability to be the body of Christ, we need to do that in a way that actually respects the workers' own organizing, that it works in collaboration with them. So I want to say that. Very quickly, I just want to say something about what it means to call our people to accountability, drawing deep on the wells of our faith. I'm going to do I have time to tell a very quick story. I could tell a million of them, and I'm going to tell a quick one. There was, in Southern California, there was a strike in the grocery industry. 30,000 workers went on strike to fight the Walmartization of the grocery industry. They were going to cut the health benefits in half, cut the wages almost in half. And at the same time as those 25,000 workers, went on strike, 2 other companies locked out another 50,000 workers. So we had 70,000 workers either locked out or on strike in Southern California. I want you just to imagine that. The strike went on for months. People lost their houses, people lost their cars, people could not get cancer medication. We were praying, we were struggling, we were trying to figure out what we could do as people of faith that would be unique, that would contribute our unique gifts. And then 2 things happened in December of 2004. One is that the head of the company where everyone was on strike, Steve Bird, said, we're not negotiating anymore. And of course, he had never really been negotiating. The longest he'd been at the table was 48 hours. He said, the workers are going to have to crawl back to the negotiating table. But then a week after that, we got a call from someone from the Screen Actors Guild who had been on a plane with Steve Bird's business consultant. And Steve Bird's business consultant said, we're worried about him, he just got religion. So we said, well, what religion did he get? Of course, it hadn't occurred to her to ask that. But we started looking desperately for his pastors. We knew he lived in Northern California. We couldn't find them. So we decided that the way that we needed to try to reach them is what comes into everybody's living room every night. TV. We decided to do something that would allow us on TV to communicate as directly with him as possible. So we did a pilgrimage of prayer from Southern California to Northern California where he lived. Pastors, workers, congregational members, workers' children, and then 2 days before we left, we discovered that he had just made the first philanthropic donation of his life to stop puppy abuse. So what did we bring on the trip? Puppies. So everywhere we stopped, we looked into the cameras. Fox News followed us all the way. And we said, Steve, our brother in faith, look at the puppies you care about. Raise your eyes from the puppies to the children. Raise your eyes from the children to the parents. Ask yourself, what would Jesus want me to do? We really shook him up. He called his pastors the night before we arrived. We arrived with 40,000 postcards. We arrived with letters from every major religious head asking him to get back to the table, to stay at the table till there was a compromise, to do something about health care, which they were going to decimate. And right before we went, the Sunday before we went, we were going on Tuesday. I was preaching about the pilgrimage in a little black and brown church. And a woman walked in from Northern California. She had never been to that church before, and I preached, and she said afterwards, my father is an elder in Steve Bird's church, Evangelical Church. So when we got there, we were able to go and meet a group, not the union, they wouldn't meet with the union, but a group of pastors with his pastors. The old guy, who was very powerful, walks in the room and he says to us, what does this circus have to do with the gospel? So we said, let's have a biblical conversation, which we did. As you know, there are about 3,000 scriptures on justice. And at the end of an hour, he said, you're right. You're right. What do you want us to say to him? And we said, well, tell him, come back to the table, negotiate until there's an agreement, do something about health care. 11 days later, he went back to the table. He stayed there for 14 days. The contract was far from perfect, but it was way better than the Walmartization of the industry. And then, quietly, he put $180 million of his own ministry back into the Health and Welfare Fund of the Union, which was bankrupt, so that people could get their medication. And then 3 years later, there was no strike when they came back up for their contract, and the health care benefits were restored because Steve Bird was negotiating behind the scenes on the side of the union. So we have to work in partnership to change the system, but we have to call on our brothers and sisters who have power and to minister to them so that they change, not only support the workers. Thank you.
Well, thanks to everybody on the panel. We've heard some very encouraging stories, but also some very depressing stories. And now the question is for us, what are we going to do about it? And we have a little time for discussion. If you have questions, if you have some suggestions, this is really our time to spend together. Before we go there, let me add maybe one more thing. Sometimes I hear people say this labor stuff, talking about field workers, talking about chicken plant workers, talking about warehouse workers. This is special interest. Some people are interested in that, others are not. The Apostle Paul knew when he talked about the body of Christ that if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. So maybe it's not special interest, but really common interest. This is the thing that is the one thing that we all have in common. Members of our body suffering, all of us suffering together with it, and all of us then also coming up with solutions together. The unions got this better, I think, than the churches. There, the motto is, an injury to one is an injury to all. If you've ever been around a union, you probably heard that saying. Maybe the unions read Paul while the churches were doing something else. An injury to one is an injury to all. One member suffering, all suffer together with it. And of course, Paul ends it saying, one member rejoicing, all rejoicing together with it. So, let me see if there are any questions or comments. I can actually reach you the mic.
Hi, I'm Jessica. Thank you all for sharing. I just wanted to share a quick experience that I had and a question that I have regarding that experience. I worked as a singer-dancer on a cruise line for about 3 years, and actually during my first contract started noticing injustices abound regarding hours of work. My friends are working 12 to 14-hour shifts every single day for the entire length of their contract. There was discrimination as to who could eat where on the ship. Unions were not allowed, and at sea it's highly unregulated because we are an American-owned company that flew a Dutch flag, but lots of these cruise lines fly what they call flags of convenience, which allows them to evade taxation and labor laws and all sorts of things. So my question was, I started talking with lots of the Indonesian and Filipino workers on the ship and getting their stories and trying to figure out what I could do given my position of privilege and power. I worked, every other day for a few hours as a performer while my friends weren't. And I started realizing that I was feeling this weight of trying to wrestle with the question of how to use a position of privilege without overstepping the voices of those who aren't quite ready to rally up and speak themselves, and wondering at what point does my voice become harmful to those, and wanting to be support, but trying to balance, to find that balance there. So I don't know if that, I think I wrote it out more articulately here. How can you come alongside the struggle without being another wealthy white American coming to save the day?
For me, I think that there are two principles here that are really important. And one is that it sounds so simple, but to talk to people with respect means to tell them what you see, what you think, what you believe, and what you feel, and to listen to what they think, believe, and feel, right? Because we all have gifts to give each other. So you don't have to be frightened to tell people what you believe, think, see, and feel, as long as you do that in a way that is totally respectful of what they believe, see, think, and feel. That's number one. The second thing is that people who are oppressed are not stupid, and know that you come with resources, and the problem is not that you come with resources if you treat them with respect. The problem is you don't come with enough resources. There's a blindness about privilege that makes us not realize all the resources we could actually bring to the table if we worked, because we don't even know what resources we have, right? So it's like, I think that at the moment it would be sort of suicidal for the people you're talking about to organize, but I think there might be unions that might be interested, and you might be able to look and find out that there might be more power that could come alongside of them than just you, and you might be in a position to look for it. It would still be their choice as to whether or not they wanted to utilize that. But so it's I think that sometimes there's a fear to actually talk straight to people, and I love that it comes out of a respect, or, a desire to respect, but man, we are brothers and sisters together, and I have been in both below and above in my life. Grew up below, now I'm a professional. Hey, talk to people from the heart, but listen, right? Does that make sense?
Yo creo que eso que hizo ella de escuchar a esos trabajadores que estaban pasando por esa situación, eso es lo que da la confianza también al trabajador para depositar la fe en que ella va a poder hacer algo. Con el simple hecho de que alguien nos escuche, que alguien nos ponga atención y sea parte de nuestro problema, eso es lo que hace que uno sienta la confianza.
And I think a really important thing that, you mentioned, just the importance of listening is something that builds trust, which is essential for that, because when you listen to someone and you really hear them and you decide to be part of their problem with them, that builds that trust.
Porque con esa historia yo creo que más que nada se trata de que ella hizo conciencia de que esa persona necesitaba ayuda. Y lo que nosotros decimos es precisamente eso: cuando tú escuchas a la persona, te despierta en ti esa creación de la conciencia, y si tú te vas y no escuchas a esa persona, yo creo que el remordimiento no te va a dejar en paz.
And so if you are able to listen to that person and be conscious and think consciously about how you might help them and stand with them, that is being conscious, which is important. I don't think you can walk away and kind of let that otherwise you'd have that unsettled feeling with you.
Porque no cualquier persona pone atención a un trabajador, no cualquier persona se toma el tiempo de escuchar cuál es el problema de los demás. Entonces yo creo que el simple hecho de que alguien tome ese tiempecito de escucharlo, eso ya es una ganancia para uno.
And, it's not every person who sits down and really listens to a worker. So just taking the time to do that, that's very important.
Y nosotros hemos trabajado con muchas personas que pasan así por situaciones, personas, trabajadores que vienen de Guatemala, que no hablan el español, es el segundo idioma. Entonces nos ha tocado hablar con ellos y ellos se niegan, dicen no queremos hablar, estamos bien, no tenemos problemas, nos tratan bien, pero nosotros sabemos en qué situación está y sabemos que es el miedo el que no los hace decir qué es lo que está pasando.
And we also experience some of that too in our own work. There's a lot of workers who come from Guatemala and maybe don't speak Spanish, speak other languages, and might say, oh no, everything is fine, they treat us well, but we know from being in those conditions that it's not like that, and that they are fearful of really sharing what the real conditions are.
Cuando salen del trabajo y que ya luego van, nosotros tenemos reunión en nuestra oficina en la coalición, tenemos reunión con los trabajadores y ahí es donde ya después empezamos a hablar con ellos, a decirles, mira, te vamos a ayudar, no tienes por qué tener miedo, nosotros somos como tú, somos trabajadores, hablamos el idioma porque hay varios trabajadores que también hablan el idioma mam o el canjobal, que es de Guatemala. Buscamos la manera de hacernos entender. Y ya cuando ellos ven que tenemos ese interés en ayudar, es cuando ya después ellos empiezan a platicar en qué situación están.
And we invite them to our meetings that we have every week. We have weekly worker meetings on Wednesdays, so we invite them to participate. And, you know, in that sort of course of time, things start to come out. We say, you know, we're workers too. A lot of us speak Mam, Cancobal, which are the different indigenous languages of Guatemala, and start talking about our experiences together, and that's when then people feel that they can share those experiences.
Hemos recibido como cantidad de historias de mujeres que cuando estamos nosotros hablando con ellas en los files les decimos, mira, somos de la coalición, estamos aquí para ayudarles si tienen problemas, si las tratan mal, si están recibiendo como peticiones de sexo a cambio de trabajo, ustedes pueden hablar con nosotros. En ese momento no dicen nada, pero después ellas nos dicen, bueno, están ahí con nosotros y queremos decir lo que nos está pasando.
And we, as staff of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, go out in the fields and talk to our fellow workers. And there's many times where we've talked to women and said, you know, if there's something going on here, if there's abuses, sexual harassment, if someone is trying to petition you for sex in exchange for work, let us know. And often in those cases, they don't say anything. But when we show that we're there to help, then later those stories come out.
Hubo una señora que estaba allá durante 5 años que había estado siendo humillada por una de las personas que estaban arriba de ella y ella no hacía nada porque dice, nadie antes había venido aquí a hablarnos de que teníamos el derecho de hacer la queja, no sabíamos a dónde ir. Después de que supieron de nosotros fue que ella nos dijo todo lo que le hacía ese hombre, cómo la humillaba, cómo le gritaba, cómo le exigía que su cubeta tenía que llevar copete, dice, para que él me la pudiera agarrar. Entonces dice, y aquí donde uno carga la cubeta de tomate tenía una bola ella, donde tantos años, por no recibir ella regaños, prefería llenar la cubeta y aguantarse.
And there was this one woman who for 5 years was being humiliated by one of the bosses or one of her supervisors, and it wasn't until that we actually arrived at that farm and talked to the workers there about their rights that she actually spoke up, and she said this is the first time that anyone has ever come to talk to us about our rights. And she said that, you know, he had been yelling at her, humiliating her, groping her, and demanding that she overfill her bucket, and which was not allowed. And she had this huge injury that bulged kind of on her shoulder from so many years of having to carry this overfilled bucket.
Entonces dice, y ahora como ustedes están yendo ahí, ahora ya sé, y por eso me animé a venir aquí, porque yo sé que ahora con el trabajo que ustedes hacen, yo no tengo miedo, y es por eso que se animó ella a ir a hacer esa queja, pero es por eso, porque ellos necesitan como primero hacer conciencia de que es importante que alguien escuche.
And she said it was only because you all came here and talked to me that now I don't have the fear of reporting this because I'm knowing going to have the support. And it was only because of that she was able to bring this up.
Entonces yo creo que eso es lo principal que uno debe de estar como hacer conciencia de que es importante también si alguien está pasando por una situación, pues escucharlo es lo principal.
So I think that's why it's important to create that consciousness, and if someone is passing through a situation, just to listen.
Y hay muchos lugares y muchas cosas que uno puede hacer cuando está así. Si uno solo como individuo no puede hacer nada, pero sí tiene el conocimiento de poder buscar ayuda para ellos, por organizaciones o sindicatos, o platicar esos problemas con alguien que uno sabe, yo creo que eso es importante para uno también, y para hacer como ayudar al prójimo sin ver a quién, como dice.
And you know, sometimes maybe you can't help them as an individual, but if you have the resources to find other ways of support, whether it be looking for an organization, another group of people, a union, or whatever it might be, to support that person in finding help, it's just helping your neighbor, really.
Maybe just one more quick comment. I think those of us who are progressive Christians can really learn something from the workers, because they know it's essential to organize, and we oftentimes don't. You know, we try to do something individually or as a small group, and so for us here also to organize like the workers organize and together with them, I think would also be an important step. So other questions, please. Here's the microphone. Just come closer. Come in.
Just a quick comment. You know, many of our livelihoods involve exploiting other people. So, you know, we're all locked into a system of exploitation. And I think if you think about the type of work you do, you can probably come up with lots of examples of that. So that's why this whole topic is really complicated. So for instance, I work in a restaurant, and they're pretty decent people to us. I mean, they pay us a pretty decent wage. But at the same time, I know where that food comes from, and I know where that shrimp came from, and I know those workers were exploited. But at the same time, when I'm on the front of the house, I have to sell that shrimp, or I don't get paid, and I don't have a job, and I have to support my family. And that chicken, the pollo, you know, comes from a plant I know is exploiting workers, and I have to sell it so I can have a living. And I don't know what to do about it. This is my comment.
I'll just say something. Your first name is? Gerard. So Gerard, it just helps us all for you to make that comment, because it helps us all realize we're connected. One of my messages when I do some work with the coalition is I just tell people we're connected by the food we eat to everyone along the chain of production. It's something a lot of us have done. I do often when I'm speaking. You might even ask your neighbor to help you with this now. As I say, get somebody, the person next to you, to look at the label inside your shirt, see where it was made. And I'm going to guess just in this circle, we probably have 20 or 25 countries where these shirts were made. And you can often guess that, a 15-year-old girl in Mexico was working 12 hours, 14 hours a day. And so suddenly you realize, wow, I'm connected. And this goes back to Joerg's comment before. It's not somebody's special interest. Now I realize I'm connected to that person. And if we start by recognizing that connection, I think we start to care. I'll just tell you something that's being worked on, and it relates to Joerg's comment about organizing. So you know how when you buy any food product, there's a little nutritional, what is it called? Nutritional facts? Yeah. And so, when I was a kid, there were not those labels on every product. Every food product has it now. And a lot of us are dreaming of a day when you can't buy any product without it having not only its nutritional facts, but also the social economic facts, that there would be transparency about it, how it was produced. And this is exactly what starts to happen when transparency comes. We never would have known about the woman at the chicken factory if somebody doesn't tell the story. Then people start to say, okay, we want to be proactive on this. We want Tyson to sign on to a statement that says they will not ever knowingly buy a product to resell. So then you start to think 20 years from now, things really could be different if we just get organized. This is one of the great reasons to to be part of a religion. Everybody's upset about organized religion. I think the problem is just that religion is organized badly for the wrong purposes. If religion got organized for better purposes, this could really make a difference. The Presbyterians just made a bold decision in this regard last week to say they will divest from some companies that are complicit in the exploitation of Palestinians. There's unspoken, undiscovered power in this.
I just want to say very quickly that there are people who are organized nationally who are doing some very good work if you want to jump in. And I want to say that, I want to first just say to you that I think it's very hard for some of us who have the spiritual gift and burden of not being able to lie to ourselves, to know where to plug in, because we see it all, right? But you can't do it all, and you can be paralyzed. So it's very important to just get in touch with some of the organizations that are doing good work. So Interfaith Worker Justice, IWJ.org, workers' campaigns all over the country engaging people of faith in the workers' campaigns. Walmart really needs people of faith to walk with those workers. United Food and Commercial Workers. I don't remember which is the website of Walmart. You know, the Walmart not Walmart, but the campaign to hold Walmart accountable. But really, tomorrow, literally, there might be something happening in your neighborhood with if it's in your neighborhood, it has your name on it. So look it up, and then you'll see.
Let me also add to that Jobs with Justice, which is IWJ and JWJ.org. Depending on where you are, they're also doing good work, and they're very open to people of faith, which I think is really one of the key elements that is shaping up this struggle. Other questions, comments? Let me ask Bruce, we have till 6 o'clock, right? We have about 15 more minutes, so.
Could you just give an update on the Publix corporate comment? I mean, it's been a little while now with Publix. Are they still going down the same line, or do they have some talking points that are different?
Probably.
Pues no hay nada diferente todavía porque Publix básicamente no tiene respuesta al por qué no participa en el programa por comida justa, a pesar de que ya hemos como logrado el acuerdo con otras corporaciones que no son de Florida. Lo único que Publix ha dicho últimamente es que eso es un problema entre trabajadores y compañías.
So Publix really hasn't changed its line. It doesn't really have a real reason for why it's not participating in the Fair Food Program. And since it's refused to join the Fair Food Program, other companies that aren't even based in Florida have joined the Fair Food Program. And what they've said and continue to say is that this is a problem between the workers and their employers in which we won't get involved. This is a labor dispute.
Son como excusas que siempre ha estado dando, pero no dice como nada nuevo ni el por qué la negativa, a pesar de que es de Florida, y ellos en sus anuncios invierten mucho dinero diciendo que les interesa mucho el bienestar de las familias y que apoyan mucho a su gente de Florida, pero no se fijan en los trabajadores del campo, en los que hacen el trabajo para que tengan ahí sus frutas y vegetales.
But they really keep giving the same excuses and the same empty PR lines while they continue to invest a lot of money in promoting themselves as a company that works to benefit families when we know that they're not respecting farm workers, and even as we are people from Florida.
Otra de las cosas que siempre ha dicho es que pues debemos de poner el centavo en el precio, pero precisamente aquellos no saben cómo funciona el programa, no se enteran que es así precisamente como funciona. Las corporaciones pagan el centavo a los ranchos que ven donde compran sus tomates, y el ranchero lo que hace es distribuirlo al trabajador, pero por la falta de información y el interés que tiene no se da cuenta que así es como funciona, es como está funcionando el programa hoy en día.
Another line that Publix uses, because the campaign is to ask for a penny more per pound for the tomatoes that farm workers pick, is they should just put the penny in the price. You put the penny in the price, we would be happy to pay it. But they don't realize, or they don't say that that's exactly how the program is working. That the penny, if they agree to pay it and they join the Fair Food Program, is they pay to the growers that they already buy their tomatoes from, and that penny is passed to the workers that pick the tomatoes that are supplied ultimately to their stores.
Entonces eso es lo que nos ha hecho todavía seguir con la campaña y bueno, seguir también extendiéndonos para donde él va caminando, pues allá vamos a ir porque es necesario que la gente también sepa de la campaña que tenemos.
And so that's why our campaign continues, and wherever they go, we'll go too, because it's necessary for all people to know about this campaign that continues.
While you're thinking about perhaps other questions and comments, let me come back to one thing that Basilio said, namely seeing the face of God in the face of working people. And I think this is the challenge before us. We have a much easier time seeing the face of God, in places that are familiar to us and perhaps places that we dream about. But the real challenge here is something will change. Our faith will change, our theology will change. The way we live our faith will change as well. In the old evangelical traditions, I grew up as a German Methodist, which is really an evangelical tradition too. We always talked about making a decision for Jesus Christ. So if you think about that now, seeing Jesus Christ in the workers, the real question is, are we making our decisions for that Christ, right? Not only have you made your personal decision for Jesus, but what Jesus are we talking about? So there may be a way of ending this session today with the old-fashioned altar call, right? Who's gonna renew their vows to Jesus Christ? What side are you on? This is the union language now again, right? What side are you on? But I think this is the decision that is before us here. How do we put ourselves in the struggle? Where do we find God before us? So I keep pushing the theological component because I think there's so much more involved here, and working with the workers on the fields, in the chicken plains, in the various places is really something that all of us truly need in order to become more fully Christian, and you could say in order to become more fully human as well. Yes.
Hi, yes, I have a question that goes back a little bit, Brian, to something that you brought up. I can, as a consumer, I can choose to buy products that perhaps I can know who produced it and I can know that it was produced fairly, but that's going to cost me more money. And that is something I'm struggling with and I can afford to do. And so I'm doing that. But the question you brought up is that there are some people that can't afford to do that. And so what do we do with our system that's a market system, that's capitalism, that just says the cheaper the better? Forgetting that if that food is cheaper, that means that somebody's getting cut out of money. Somewhere along that chain, the grower, the producer, the picker, somebody's earning less money so that I feel better because I went to Walmart and I, saved, what do they say? You save pennies or dimes or whatever, you roll back. But what do we do as consumers at the policy level up there? In our buying patterns and also our advocacy.
Well, you're asking a really great and difficult question, and the good thing you're doing is you're getting us to think about this reality. And this is why I don't think a lot of us Americans, we want a quick fix. And I just think this is something that will never be fixed, but we can always be making progress on. And I think we have to work at all levels and take little steps and always be aware of unintended consequences. And one of the problems is whenever you start talking about this, I'm going to be a little bit blunt, okay? Whenever you start talking about this, people of a certain conservative and sometimes libertarian ideology sometimes come back and say, just let the market do its work, right? And the market will solve all the problems. The irony is that some people are very suspicious of unaccountable or big government, but they're completely unsuspicious about unaccountable and big business. And I think one of the things we have to do, I think pastors need to do, is because the Bible is honest about economics. And this is why Joerg's work, I think, is so important. If we can help pastors, nobody ought to be able to finish seminary without learning sort of economics from a Christian perspective. But one of the things I think we have to help people understand is the simple idea of externalized costs. An externalized cost is when I make a bigger profit for my company by not paying the full cost of production. I let other people pay the cost so I can make a bigger profit. So what we have to help people see is you might be saving money by buying a Walmart when you buy a plastic household good. But by getting that at a bargain, which means the employees don't get insurance, which means more and more of them show up at the hospital for the emergency room because they can't get health care, which means that health care costs go up. In the long run, you are paying more, but all you're doing is you're letting some people in different corporations make more at your expense. So we have to help people see the solidarity of workers and in this. So my brother Joerg, when he says, I feel bad about, those shrimp, well, you know what? That's a cost. He is the bad feeling he has, and what we want to do is let the buyers feel like, I feel bad eating those shrimps. And then people start saying, I don't want to feel bad, and somebody else is feeling really good, So then we start sort of spreading this sense that we're working in this together. One of the problems, I think, in labor movements that we've got to get better on is that vilifying or villainizing people has some unintended consequences too. So this is where I think people of faith who make a moral summons and you back it up with pressure, I think this is part of our job in the faith community too.
Maybe one more thing about this question. If it were a free market system where everybody got their fair share, where the workers would actually be paid what they're worth for, you could say that's a good thing. The reality is that the forces against the workers are very well organized. I could tell you some stories about what we're experiencing in the Walmart struggle. Walmart is extremely well organized against the workers. And so in that sense, we're not fighting a battle on an equal battlefield. We're really fighting an uphill battle, and what you're seeing there is a sort of exploitation that has nothing to do with the free market. Now, there are some questions you might raise about the free market, but we really have to ask what Brian was talking about. What is it that these corporations are doing who are organizing ultimately not for us, but against us? What this means for the consumers then is maybe we shouldn't just think about it as individual consumers, but even organizing consumers, and to think about what values do we share in common, what do we really want to support, what do we need to support. Having on the labor side, worker-owned corporations is one thing. Having consumer organized shops, stores is something else. Food co-ops, perhaps, something like that. So those are all models. And none of this is foreign to our faith, because our faith is an organized faith. It goes back to Moses, as I said earlier. It goes back to the Jesus movement. This is all about organizing. It's never about individual religiosity or spirituality. So if you think about it that way, something really big begins to happen. And not only are we pushing back against exploitation, I think we're finding a whole new way of life that brings us together, and that ultimately makes living in community, including religious community, worthwhile. So that then serves and perhaps saves everybody. This is, of course, a funny word, right? Saving. What do we mean, right? If Jesus saves, I want to know where he shops, something like that. That's one way of saving. We could save a couple of bucks, but salvation here flips exactly to the opposite. It becomes about liberation, really, the full life, the whole life. What we're celebrating here at the Wild Goose.
Last question.
If I could also just respond. I just want to say that when I mentioned Interfaith Worker Justice earlier, or Joerg mentioned Jobs with Justice, that these are organizing efforts that are faith community labor together. And they're actually very comprehensive and very creative. So they work on things like CEO compensation, which is a huge issue in terms of lowering overall costs, keeping costs low. They work on usually these kinds of coalitions work both on what I think of as the community development or alternative system approaches, the consumer approaches, as well as the worker organizing approaches. And those coalitions are alive and well and want you, want your creativity, want your participation. So you don't have to invent the wheel. You know, you can improve the wheel with your own vision and your own creativity.
So some of the things that we've done here as a collective, and you can talk to each of us afterwards, are certainly worth paying attention to. Another website is the CLUE, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice in California. That's clue.org for those of you who are in California. If you want some ideas for religion and labor, check out North Texas Jobs with Justice. There's a Facebook page. Or if you figure out how to spell my name, you can also go to Rieger.com, where we're reporting some of these things as they happen in Dallas. So I think you said last question. Was that the last question? I think we're about at the end of our time. Thank you all for coming. Feel free to to stay in touch. Let's work together.
Okay, you're not really rushed. Stuff from here will be up there. As soon as I get back. I wish we had about a dozen. Very interesting.
Be involved just to know, oh, that these people aren't paid this way. This is how the economics is working. And I'm interested in learning more about that. How to try to promote that. Where do I go, or try to figure out how to be involved in that?
I mean, ultimately, you really have to be there with the workers to know anything. So in Dallas, we have this worker rights board that meets usually Labor Day weekend, and we have people tell their stories, because those stories you would never hear in the media, not in the newspaper, and so you don't even, you have to be close to find out what's going on. And when you promote the stories, it's another struggle, because people are not just waiting for you to tell their stories. They try to either ignore it or push back against it, and so in that sense, you really have to be committed to making it happen.
So as far as the promotion, once you get the stories, is it just finding the right way to promote it? Basically, is that's the main struggle, or like promoting? Yeah.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I think even promoting it helps. So I wouldn't have too heavy a standard to say, well, it has to be this way or that way. On the other hand, here's the next thing. If you simply look at this as some bad apples, right? So Walmart is stealing wages. Well, okay, then we can deal with that. But if you start understanding that's how the economy goes, and what happens in Walmart is very likely to happen somewhere else as well, all the way back up to the lawyer's offices, I mean, a lawyer working for a corporation is also under pressure. So in that sense, how you tell that story, that transparency also matters. And ultimately, if you have the guts to talk about the system, that means capitalism, the economics that we have now, and not just any capitalism, but sort of neoliberal, that form of capitalism that we have now, that is, I think, what it really takes.
So, I just had the question and it disappeared in my head. Let's say something like Brian was saying, the nutrition facts label. What if you were to have how would you get a label that says the economic facts about whatever it is that you're producing? Is there like a legal step as well to that?
Wow, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, I heard Brian talk about this, but the reality is there are so many forces against us that this is not going to... I mean, it would be a legal step, I guess. You could have an FDA and then, a workers' rights administration or something like that, like Food and Drug Administration. But right now we don't even have the basic protection for workers at that level. So I think that's way ahead in the future. If you think about the basic thing that workers can do, organize, get together, that even is almost impossible according to our laws. When you can get together, but they cannot form a union very easily. You have many hoops to jump through that. You could see that as a violation of human rights law. United Nations say everybody has the right to collective bargaining. Most of the workers don't. So at that level, this is far removed from having this actually on a label. For the workers that wouldn't even get this out much don't have the right to organize and all that.
So the next step is involving just getting the fundamental rights of these workers to start happening. For someone who's new to getting into this, what are those things, and how are you trying to approach getting those workers to have those rights?
Well, I mean, in that regard, let me check with this one guy over there.
Sure,
I'll be right back.
All right.
We'll have the conversation afterwards.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Daniel.
Dale, what's yours?
Nice to meet you, Dale. What's your name? Hey, Genevieve. Hey. Nice to meet you too.
Hi there.
Here, real quick. Nice to meet you.
Do you use the phrase "occupy" very much anymore?
Not as much. No.
Like the same issues are still there. None of them gone away.
I used it for a while when that term was on people's minds, but it's exactly the same issues, just using some different terminology.
Yeah.
Plus the old Occupy heritage. I mean, this is back to your question.
Yeah.
We had an Occupy Dallas, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Dallas. And that really brought together a lot of the communities, a lot of the progressive movements. And so what I would say is you don't have to invent anything. Just look what's right there in your location. See what's already happening. And a good place to look that we usually don't look as Christians is the unions. I mean, see what's happening. Not just individual unions, but start with a central labor crisis. Most places have a place where the unions organized together, where they're together, meeting and talking about issues. Yeah. So when you get there, I don't know where you're located.
I'm in Maryland.
Maryland, okay. I don't know that world as well, but
yeah, it's cool.
But so that's one way to get started, just to see what people are doing.
Right. Yeah. Okay.